Are you going to launch an effort to try to delay the election, or was that just a trial balloon this morning?
Well, what I want to explain to people, but it doesn't need much explanation. I mean, you look at article after article, New York's mail vote disaster. Tens of thousands of mail ballots have been tossed out in this year's primaries. What will happen in November? It's a mess. This is done by Washington Post. Can you believe it? The Washington Post of all papers. Fake news, but in this case, it's not fake. It's true. This is done by the Wall Street Journal. Here's another one. Vote by mail experiment reveals potential problems within postal voting system ahead in the November election. And you see what's happening with so many different places. They're doing even trial runs. They're a disaster. And I don't want to see an election. You know, so many years I've been watching elections. And they say the projected winner or the winner of the election. I don't want to see that take place in a week after November 3rd or a month or, frankly, with litigation and everything else that can happen, years, or you never even know who won the election. You're sending out hundreds of millions of universal mail-in ballots, hundreds of millions. Where are they going? Who are they being sent to? It's common sense. You don't have to know anything about politics. And the Democrats know this. The Democrats know this, Steve. So I want an election and a result much more than you. I think we're doing very well. I want to have the result of the election. I don't want to be waiting around for weeks and months and literally, potentially, if you really did it right, years, because you'll never know. These ballots are missing. You saw Paterson, New Jersey. You saw many other instances. There's tremendous litigation on that right now. And that doesn't include absentee. Absentee is different. Absentee, you have to work, and you have to send in for applications. You have to go through a whole procedure. Like, for instance, I'm an absentee voter because I can't be in Florida, because I'm in Washington. I'm at the White House. So I'll be an absentee voter. We have a lot of absentee voters, and it works. So we're in favor of absentee, but it's much different than millions of people. In California, they're going to send out tens of millions of voting forms. Well, where are they going to go? You read where postmen are in big trouble now. You read where city councils are in big trouble now. Voter fraud all over the ballots. So, no, I want to be standing, hopefully, hand held high, big victory.
But delaying the election is probably a non-starter. Wouldn't you agree with that?
I just feel I don't want to delay. I want to have the election. But I also don't want to have to wait for 3 months and then find out that the ballots are all missing and the election doesn't mean anything. That's what's going to happen, Steve. That's common sense. And everyone knows it. Smart people know it. Stupid people may not know it. And some people don't want to talk about it, but they know it. And no, we want to have an election where people actually go in and what's your name? My name is so-and-so. Boom, you signed the book like I've been doing for years. It's very, very unfair to our country. If they do this, our country will be a laughingstock all over the world because everyone knows it doesn't work. How many ballots is he sending in California? Is it 28 million or some massive number? Other states are sending out millions and millions of ballots. Well, they've done it. They had experiments. They had news organizations experimenting. And look, read the story in the Washington Post about mail-in voting. It's a disaster. I'm very surprised to see that story, frankly, from them. The story is a disaster. So we're asking for a lot of trouble. And no, do I want to see a date change? No. But I don't want to see a crooked election. This election will be the most rigged election in history if that happens.
So now maybe Republicans will acknowledge the legitimacy of Democrats claiming that Trump is a fascist. Because in case there's any doubt, this is fascist. It's not quasi-fascist, it's not fascist adjacent, it is obvious, egregious, blatant fascism. Before we go any further, let me just say this. Regardless of Trump's authoritarian fever dreaming, he can't move the date of the election, period. The election was set by federal statute in 1845, and Trump has no authority to change it. The only entity that's able to change the date of the election is Congress, and they're not going to. Democrats have come out against it, and Republicans have come out against it. So do not worry about the date of the election getting changed, because it will not happen. Period. But let's be honest here, the goal isn't to actually get the date of the election changed, although I'm sure Trump was more than willing to at least test the waters and gauge interest. The goal is to further discredit the election results. He's already gone all in on his campaign of trying to convince people that it's rigged and that voting by mail, which most of us will rely on given the pandemic, is rife with fraud. Now he's trying to convince people that he's just not going to accept the results of the election, that he's not going to leave anyway, and so what's the point? Why bother voting? The answer being that regardless of his fear-mongering and efforts to sow doubt, if and when he loses, he's leaving. Whether he does it on his own volition or whether Capitol Hill police officers have to drag him out. No amount of foot stomping or all caps tweeting is going to change that. Now, fascism aside, there's also the fact that Trump is quite good at distracting everyone from one glaring failure with another. In this case, we have a number of them to choose from. There's, of course, the explosive coronavirus outbreak in this country, there's protests and civil unrest in a number of cities across the US, but then there's also the issue of the economy, which is the one issue that Trump really cares about. And yet today, the news broke that the US economy dropped 32.9% this quarter in the worst GDP report in modern US history. And it wasn't even close. The second worst was a 10% contraction in 1958. Here's what the last 80 years looks like. Let me know when you're able to spot where Trump's presidency falls on that chart. Tell you what, he promised to run the country like his business is. That's one thing he wasn't lying about. The point here is that Trump knows he's going to lose. He's down not only in polls in every single battleground state, but in states that Republicans have held onto for decades. There are polls showing Trump down in Florida, in Ohio, in Texas. Americans are realizing that Trump can't lead, that he views his ego as more important than American lives, that he's incapable of admitting fault, and that he's just too bored to bother governing. And so, while the solution would be for Trump to actually change his behavior and focus on the pandemic and the recession and the protests, instead he opted to just dig in his heels and go even further in the direction of a batshit crazy authoritarian. And it's a vicious cycle that'll only result in worse polls and more erratic behavior, because this president only has one strategy and it's a failing one. The point is that whether Trump is truly trying to delay the election or just trying to sow doubt in the process as a whole, his behavior is beyond disqualifying. So regardless of whether you're a Democrat or an independent or the staunchest of Republicans, you should be able to recognize that this isn't the behavior of a leader of a democracy, it's the behavior of an authoritarian. And the only thing that stands between democracy and devolving into a full-blown dictatorship is if people ignore his desperate fear-mongering and vote in numbers so great, so decisive, that there's no doubt he'll be gone after one term. And don't forget to listen to my podcast, No Lie with Brian Tyler Cohen, where I'll take a deep dive into the biggest issues of the week and interview major players in the world of politics, like Adam Schiff, Nancy Pelosi, Beto O'Rourke, Eric Swalwell, Katie Porter, and many more. Again, that's No Lie with Brian Tyler Cohen, available anywhere you listen to podcasts.